Good morning and welcome to the Ocean Expert Exchange. Scientists in every Florida school and ANGARI Foundation are excited to have you as part of this live webinar event series called Ocean Expert Exchange. It focuses on ocean science and technology experts. In this monthly series, we dive into all things marine science and explore what's happening in the field, interesting careers, and more. Today, we will be joined by Dr. Mike Heithaus of Florida International University about his research on the important roles sharks play in our oceans. But first, we'd like to tell you a little bit about our programs. The Scientist in Every Florida School is a free program housed within the Thompson Earth Systems Institute at the University of Florida. The mission of CEFS is to engage Florida K-12 students and teachers in cutting-edge research by providing science role models and experiences like today that inspire the future stewards of our planet. ANGARI Foundation is a nonprofit headquartered in West Palm Beach, Florida. The foundation supports and promotes marine science research and education, and many of the foundation's primary initiatives involve its 65-foot research vessel, RV ANGARI. In case you missed any of the information in today's preview slides, we'd like to remind you that you can submit questions for the scientist by typing them in the chat box at any time. At this time, we would like to introduce you to Dr. Mike Heithaus. Dr. Heithaus, we'll turn things over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much. It is really exciting to be here today. And I see we've got folks from all over the world here. And I am always happy to be able to talk about sharks and other marine organisms. And I am a marine biologist. I have the great pleasure of being able to travel all over the world to study big ocean predators and some land predators, and to work with incredible people all over on these projects. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is how important is it to have big predators in ecosystems? And this is a really important question to answer because big predators are in trouble, and we have populations of sharks and big fish like tuna that have decreased more than 90% in a lot of areas. And, you can see that there can be conflict between people and animals and having awesome, healthy ocean ecosystems while people are still able to get the resources they need from the ocean. And I think this video kind of shows that. This is a video a friend of mine took in the middle of the Bering Sea, where there are really not many people, but this stellar sea lion decided it was a whole lot easier to visit the buffet table than it was to work for a meal. Now, luckily in this case, the fisherman had a pretty good sense of humor about this, but it can show you where this conflict between animals and people can happen. And that one was too big, so just throw it back and get another one. But it shows that conflict. And so the work that I do and my colleagues do is trying to figure out how we find that balance of having healthy oceans, lots of big predators in them, but also where people can use them. And to really know how to do this, we have to understand how ecosystems work. And so sometimes that means that we have to go to one place and study it really, really well to get into kind of the inner workings of that area. And that's one reason that for more than 20 years, I've been going to a place called Shark Bay, Western Australia, which is about as far away as I can get from home base here in Miami, Florida, and still be on dry land at night. And the reason we go that far is because Shark Bay represents a relatively undisturbed ecosystem where we have these really big tiger sharks and the species they interact with. It's also one of the largest seagrass beds in the entire world. And it's a great model system for other places where people have had a bigger impact, like here in Florida, where we've lost a lot of our tiger sharks, but we still have these seagrass ecosystems. So just to give you a little bit of background on the bay, it is built on a foundation of seagrass, but we should really probably call it more of a sea bush than seagrass because it can grow up to be 4 or 5 feet tall, maybe almost 2 meters tall. And it's this great habitat for lots of little fish, and it pulls carbon out of the water and then puts it in the ground when the plants die. So it's the foundation of an ecosystem that supports fish and the people that want to catch those fish, but it's also food for a couple of grazers. The first is called the dugong. This is Australia's version of a manatee. One of the differences is that they have these tails that look more like a whale or dolphin tail than the ping pong paddle of the manatee. And while the manatees are kind of appropriately called sea cows, we might want to call dugongs sea pigs because they love to dig down below the sediment to eat the stems of the seagrass where there's lots of nutrition. So they can really tear up seagrass beds when they're foraging. The other grazer that we have in Shark Bay is the green sea turtle, which we also have here in Florida. And, they like to generally bite the leaves of the seagrass. Now, both of these species are on the menu for tiger sharks. Tiger sharks are officially awesome. They can grow to be 15 feet or more, so more than 4.5 meters, and they are built for eating big prey. They have these giant wide heads, their mouth's right at the end of the snout, and then they have teeth that are kind of curved and serrated. So they can actually grab onto a sea turtle, saw their head back and forth, and cut right through that shell. Now, if you're a tiger shark and you've done this, you have a problem. You've got all that good turtle meat in you, but you also have the shell. But don't worry, tiger sharks have this covered. I know it's only lunchtime, but hang with me here. Tiger sharks can leave it in their stomach, digest the good parts, and they can turn their stomach inside out through the mouth. The shell falls out. They suck their stomach back down and they're ready to go again. Pretty awesome. But tiger sharks have very broad diets. They also like their version of spaghetti. Sea snakes. And a lot of the tiger sharks, they can just slurp these sea snakes down. But in Shark Bay, the tiger sharks will also eat stingrays, seabirds, and about 75% of the dolphins there have big bites on them from where the tiger sharks have attacked them. And then this can cascade down through the ecosystem to the fish that are fed on by the seabirds and the dolphins. And some of these fish that are really abundant eat the seagrass itself. And so we've been trying to figure out what happens if you take tiger sharks out of this ecosystem. And so that means we have to use lots of different methods to study these animals. And I'll show you a little video here of Shark Bay. Lots of different animals there. And we really want to focus on these tiger sharks. So to figure out when the tiger sharks are around in the bay, we go out and we set lines out in the morning. And then we go back a few hours later and we're able to see if there are tiger sharks on them. Now, the tiger sharks we catch there, the average size is about 10 feet long. And we've gotten sharks up to almost 15 feet long. And on one day where we put 10 hooks out, a good day is we have 7 tiger sharks the first time we go check those lines. So with each of those sharks, we put a tag in them. We collect blood samples that let us know what they've been eating. And we can put transmitters on them to see where they go. We also do some work on all of the other species there. Show this little quick video here for how we work on turtles. Sometimes we drive around and count them at the surface, but when we want to do more work with them, we actually have to catch them. And so you have to jump off a perfectly good boat and hold on. And so that's how we catch turtles. And then we can put camera tags on them or tags that tell us where they're moving and then let them go. The other thing we have to do is we go out and we map where all the seagrass is. That's kind of the foundation of the ecosystem. We set out cameras or traps to be able to count the fish. And then we drive up and down all day in some shallow waters and some deep waters to count where the dugongs, dolphins, and turtles are. And then to see how animals behave, we've been developing for many years these camera tags called, you may have heard of Critter Cam. And so this is one of our first cameras we ever put on a tiger shark. Cameras were much bigger back then. Now they're much smaller, but this is a shark wearing one of these cameras. And then that lets us see where the shark goes and kind of see the world from their perspective to see what habitats they're using and how they are going after their prey. So that's a turtle it's about to go after. Turtle lifts its head, the shark turns away and says, forget it. One of the things we found out about these tiger sharks is they are very lazy. They don't tend to go blasting around trying to catch prey. They wait until they can take something by surprise. And so one of the things that we have found with the tiger sharks is that they're not in Shark Bay all the time. There's some months where there are lots of them around and there are lots of big tiger sharks around. And then there are other months when there are not as many tiger sharks around. But when there are sharks there, their favorite place to be is in those shallow areas where there's lots of seagrass and lots of fish. So if you're a dolphin or a sea cow or a sea turtle, you have to decide when the sharks are around if you want to go into shallow waters where there's lots of food, but it's also dangerous, or if you'd rather be in an area that's safer, but there's not as much food to eat. And what we've found here is that when the tiger sharks show up, they completely change the nature of the bay. So when there are no tiger sharks around, the dolphins spend almost all their time in the shallow waters foraging. The dugongs are in there. They're digging up the seagrass, creating these big clouds of sediment, but they're ripping up the seagrass trying to feed. But it's not very often that we don't have tiger sharks there. And when the tiger sharks show up, most of those animals stay out of the shallow waters. Even though there's lots of food there, they ignore it because they would rather be safer and get less food. And so the dugongs aren't in there ripping up the seagrass. The turtles aren't in there as much. And the dugongs switch from being sea pigs to sea cows. They only kind of nibble at the leaves instead of digging up the root stems and creating these big plumes that might hide the approach of a shark. And so by having these tiger sharks there, they actually are protecting big areas of the seagrass. And so the whole foundation of this ecosystem is protected by the sharks. So when we've got lots of sharks, we get a system built up like you see on the left side here, where we've got more diversity, we've got more seagrass, more fish, lots of food. In the areas where there aren't as many sharks, we get something that looks kind of like a super well-mown lawn, just this very little seagrass that, yeah, there's some food there for the turtles and the dugongs, but there's nowhere for fish to hide from dolphins. And there's not a lot of seagrass there to kind of get buried down in the sediment. And so this shows us how important these sharks can be. And, it took us about 15 years to figure that out. And just when we thought we knew what was going on, we had a crazy extreme event happen. The water temperatures in Shark Bay went through the roof as this big blob of hot water sat on top of the bay. And we called it a marine heat wave. And the seagrass went from what you see on the top to what you see on the bottom. Almost all of that big sea bush seagrass died. And we had this just tiny little seagrasses start to get established. And this very well could have been the fate of the bay, to become that kind of well-mowed lawn. But yeah, yuck, right? That doesn't look like very good habitat. We had less seagrass, less fish. The seabirds weren't doing very well, and neither were the dolphins and dugongs. But luckily, we have tiger sharks there. And so the tiger sharks being there kept the sea cows and sea turtles from eating the last bits of seagrass. So over time, they let the ecosystem come back to what it was. So these sharks we find, number one, the fish say yay, because now they've got their habitat back. And the tiger sharks we see are really important to these seagrass ecosystems. And when we look around the world at places where we've lost tiger sharks, we see that we're starting to lose seagrasses because it's being overgrazed. And so we realize that we really need to make sure that we're not just protecting the sharks that are left, but we're actually restoring their populations. Now, kind of being a big predator isn't the only role that sharks play in the ecosystem. And for a lot of years, we've been working in these coastal waters of Florida, where these baby bull sharks, you can see there are my hands there, so that's a pretty small little bull shark, they live up in the fresh water. And what we've been seeing here is that these little sharks that we catch on these long lines and we put transmitters in them, we are able to track the movements of these bull sharks as they move way upstream, and then some of them go downstream to feed. And what we see is that these different sharks have different personalities. Some are kind of shy and they stay really far away from the ocean where it's safer, but there's not food. Others go upstream and then they swim downstream where there might be lots of predators, but there's lots of food, and then they swing back upstream. When they swim back upstream, they poop. And that nutrient they put in the ocean or in these upstream areas could be really important for the whole ecosystem. So they're kind of fertilizing it from the bottom up. But just like Shark Bay and those tiger sharks, these ecosystems can be disturbed too. And here in Florida, that can be cold snaps sometimes, or it can be hurricanes. And what we've seen in these areas is that these changes in the environment can cause the shark populations to almost disappear for months at a time, or maybe even reset them. So it can take years for the populations to come back if too many of the little sharks die. And so what we see is having these sharks in ecosystems is important, but the whole ecosystem can be changed by these extreme events like marine heat waves, marine cold snaps, and hurricanes. Now, unfortunately, we only have about 15 minutes for me to talk, and then I'm going to answer as many questions as I can. But one of the things that's really cool is that there are more than 500 different kinds of sharks out there, from the big predators like tiger sharks and great hammerheads to animals that spend more time on the bottom, like the nurse sharks, or sharks as big as a school bus, like the whale shark, but that eat very, very small prey. And with sharks living in habitats from those coastal rivers to the seagrass beds to coral reefs, or living in the deep oceans, what we see is that sharks play lots of different roles around the world. Don't try to memorize this slide in one, but this just shows you all the different places around the world where people have done studies to see how sharks affect their ecosystems. And what we see is they have lots of different effects. And the way they affect ecosystems is really similar to the predators we see on land. So what we know is if you lose wolves from an ecosystem, you can have the deer populations explode and they may eat themselves out of house and home. If we lose sea otters, sea urchins that they eat explode and they wipe out the kelp. Without the kelp, there's not enough habitat for the other fish and seals that live in those areas. But also we have those nutrient movers on land too, like bears, where they eat the salmon that come up from the woods, and the bear poops in the woods, and all those nutrients from the ocean end up helping to grow forests. So I think the one thing that I'd love everybody to take home is that we want these big predators in ecosystems so we can have healthy oceans and healthy ecosystems on land. And wherever you live, I hope you get a chance to go outside and explore, because it is an amazing, amazing world out there. And I would love to answer any questions that you have. Thanks so much for hanging out today.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about your work. You do incredible stuff using fascinating techniques for studying sharks, and we're so glad that we were able to learn from you today. We're going to begin our Q&A session of today's presentation. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box, and I'll go ahead and ask them on your behalf. We're going to start our question and answer session with our questions from some fifth graders from Tanager Smith, who would like to know what the most significant challenges are that you face during shark research and ocean exploration.
Well, probably the biggest challenge we face is just how hard it is to be out on the ocean and studying animals that can swim across an entire ocean. And so getting enough samples and spending enough time out there can be really hard. So those little 2 minutes that I spent talking about Shark Bay, that took us almost 20 years of work where we had people doing studies almost every day of the year, around the year. And so it can be really hard to get out there to really learn a lot about one ecosystem in depth. But it's also one of the exciting things about it. And I mean, for me, I'm a sucker for a challenge. So the harder it is, kind of the more gratifying it is to do it and to solve these problems. And it's where, you know, you need to build really good teams of people that work together, because different people have different skills. So you need engineers to help build the technology. You need oceanographers that understand how currents move. You need the biologists, and you know, you need to work with the communities there too, because we couldn't have done the work we did in Shark Bay without the Yadgala Aboriginal Corporation helping us out, with the local Australians providing us with a lot of resources. And so, you know, the challenge is really just kind of the amount of effort it takes to do it, but in the end, it is definitely all worth it.
Absolutely, right? Some of the most important work is the most challenging work. So we're glad that you're doing it. And then as a follow-up question, what technologies do you utilize to make this research and exploration feasible?
Well, okay, so we use all kinds of technology. You saw the camera technologies. That's one of the big ones that we use. And so as battery technologies get better, as cameras get smaller, it lets us work with different species. We also use something that you saw there called acoustic tracking, which is those little transmitters, and they send out a little ping with sound into the water, and each one pings in a different way. And then we have listening stations that can pick up that ping and tell us what shark was there or what alligator was there at what point in time, and we can download that. Sometimes we use satellite transmitters that when a shark comes up to the surface, it'll send a ping up to a satellite and back to us. But more and more, we're using artificial intelligence. So as we put video cameras out and collect lots and lots of video data, it's too much to watch. So we're using computer learning and AI to go through in that. And so we use technology all the time, but I will also say one thing. Sometimes we get so excited about technology, we forget that sometimes a pair of binoculars or just being out there and using low tech, lots of time observations is really important. And I think that's one of the skills of a scientist that we don't talk about enough, is just that skill of going out and making observations and kind of trying to come up with questions rather than just running out and using technology, really getting to know a spot and learn about it and just sit back and observe the world.
Absolutely, thank you. Next, we have Annie who asks, is there a specific time of day or season that the tiger sharks show up?
This is a great question. So in Shark Bay, the tiger sharks are always there during the summer. So, and that's a long time kind of in Shark Bay. So there's kind of 9 months a year where there are always tiger sharks there. But then the neat thing is in some winters, the sharks are there all winter long. In other winters, they almost all disappear. And in some, they're there kind of in less numbers, but they're there. And so that's where we can really use that difference in how many sharks are there or not, especially in winter, to see how the dolphins and dugongs and turtles respond. Because it's not just that they're changing their behavior in winter and summer, it's what are they doing in winter when there's sharks, when there's some, when there are lots of sharks, medium sharks, and no sharks. And now that's kind of changing through time as well, because with changing temperatures, that really changes where sharks are and what they're doing. Because like people, most sharks have their favorite temperatures, and so they'll move as those temperatures change.
Sure, absolutely. Next, we have Emily who asks if the impact on the seagrass is considered a top-down trophic cascade, and as a follow-up, how do we recruit more tiger sharks into seagrass areas?
Great question. So number one, you are exactly right. That would be a top-down trophic cascade. And kind of the neat thing is it's really more about how the sharks are scaring animals than it is how many they're eating. So that's one of the neat things we study, is kind of fear of predators can be as important as how many things predators eat. But that is a top-down trophic cascade of sharks affect the grazers, which affects the seagrass. But it also is sharks affect the dolphins that affect the fish that affect the seagrass. In terms of how do we recruit more tiger sharks to seagrass, what we need to do is work to have people catching less sharks. And the biggest threat to sharks is overfishing. And so, yeah, these populations can come back if we don't fish them as heavily. And that's really what we need to do. There's not much we can do in terms of, baiting or trying to attract them in. It's really, we just need to rebuild their numbers in areas where their populations have dropped. And, we're starting to see indications that in places like Florida, the tiger shark numbers are slowly starting to come back. But when I go out in Florida Bay and the Florida Keys, I mean, those are areas that we should see a lot of these sharks. There are turtles there, there's seagrass. It's just like Shark Bay in a lot of ways, but they've been fished much more heavily. But luckily, we've got good policies in place in the state and in the U.S., and so we're starting to see those recoveries happen, which is really great to see.
Yeah, excellent. Next, we have Miss Craig's class, who would like to know if the critter cam impacts the shark at all, since the camera looks pretty big.
Yeah, that is a great question. And that's one thing that we do a lot of work on, is seeing how it affects the animals. And you can see that was a pretty big shark. That was from way back, well before most of you were born, in 1997. So, most of the cameras now are about the size of GoPros or a little bit bigger. And what matters more than how big it is it's how much air cross section there is. So it's kind of like, what's the diameter of the circle and how is it shaped, because it's how much drag goes through the water. And what we saw with these tiger sharks is that as soon as we let them go with those cameras, they would start hunting prey and foraging very quickly. And so tiger sharks are one species we could put those bigger cameras on and not affect their behavior. A lot of times what we do is try to put the cameras on animals that were in an aquarium, or for in a zoo for some of the land animals we worked with. And if we saw that it affected their behavior, we didn't work with those animals until we were able to develop smaller cameras. But because it doesn't really help us at all if we're affecting their behavior. So we did a lot of work for animals like whales that we use suction cups on. We would trial it on me before we would trial it on a whale. So I have worn suction cup camera tags on land and in the pool to make sure that it doesn't hurt or doesn't really change how much drag there is while swimming.
Excellent, thanks. Brianna wonders how tiger sharks counteract the effects of the sea snake venom when consumed.
Well, this is the cool thing. So the sea snakes, really, for that venom to work, it's going to mainly have to be injected like from a bite. So the tiger sharks they have very impressive digestive systems, so they're able to break that down in the stomach. And the really kind of cool thing when we did some things where we put cameras down to kind of look inside the shark stomachs, or when they every so often would puke next to the boat. A lot of the sea snakes had their heads not attached. And what we think is happening is, we saw this in the cameras, the sea snakes feed on burrowing fish. And so we think sometimes the sea snakes have their head down in the sand and their tails waving around up in the water, and the sharks are kind of coming down and just kind of biting them off. Which is not funny if you're a sea snake, but they're kind of grazing. So they're very unlikely to be bitten at any point in time when they are eating these really, some of the most venomous animals on the planet.
Sure. Kathleen asks if there are healthy shark populations in the Gulf, and will those populations help protect the remaining parts of our seagrass beds here?
Yeah, so in the Gulf of Mexico, we're not where we need to be, is what I'd say, but it's not too horrible. I mean, we need to see more of these big tiger sharks, frankly. But it seems like bull shark populations are doing really well. The data we're seeing from NOAA is that populations are starting to edge back up, and they probably weren't nearly as depleted as in a lot of areas of the world. But we certainly don't see as many big tiger sharks and the predators that we would see on turtles that we'd expect. So we may be seeing some of the effects out there of not having enough of these predators, but it's not as extreme as areas like in Bermuda, where tiger shark populations in the Atlantic really were probably down at least 80%. And the turtle populations exploded there, and they've wiped out all of the seagrass just about on the Bermuda platform. And so, those are, and we see similar things appearing to happen, near India. We don't see that seagrass decline happening in the Gulf yet, so maybe we aren't quite in that same area. But the restoring tiger shark sea turtle interactions is something that we should be trying to do around the world.
Sure. Several folks in the chat mentioned that we have spent a lot of time discussing how the recent hurricanes have impacted our communities on land. How do the hurricanes that recently traveled through the Gulf of Mexico affect the underwater communities and especially sharks?
Great question. That could be a whole talk in and of itself. So the thing that we've seen with the sharks, we don't know how these last three have affected them, because our listening stations that are out there, we're just going out to download them now. So in a few weeks, we should know what happened there, because our work in Rookery Bay, which is near Naples, Florida, and Marco Island, and then the work kind of further south, a couple of those hurricanes had storm surges that affected those. But when we had Ian come through, what we saw is that some sharks didn't make it out in time and died. Most of the sharks left in the few days or week before that came, and then they moved up the coast. And we had the big storm surge come through, and the dissolved oxygen just went way, way down. And so animals like the fish and sharks, some of them, if they didn't get out, died. But then over the next few months, things started to come back in and repopulate. If we don't have direct hits, the effects seem to be pretty darn low. And in fact, the cold snap we had about 14 years ago had a much bigger effect, where we actually lost every single bull shark in the population. And then we had to have new ones born and then grow up. So it took about 7 years before that system kind of came back to look like it did before that cold snap. But the hurricanes seem to be kind of pulses that have a big impact, and then it on the stuff below water, and then it comes back relatively quickly. Now, the mangroves can get torn up. And one of the things we're trying to understand now is that a lot of those hurricanes, the storm surge pushes a lot of nutrients from the ocean up into places like the Shark River Slough and the coastal Everglades. And those are areas that don't typically have a lot of nutrients. And those pulses from hurricanes may actually be very important for kind of fertilizing those areas over long periods of time. And so we're just starting to really get a handle on how these hurricanes are affecting these subsurface ecosystems.
Thank you. Next, our question is from Shannon, who is just curious what your favorite type of shark is.
Someone always has to ask the hardest question. Usually the answer is whatever I've been working with last. And I just got back from a trip studying these cute little tiny lemon sharks and blacktip sharks in French Polynesia. But I've spent so much time studying tiger sharks. I mean, I really love those tiger sharks. They're just kind of like slow and methodical, beautiful animals, important for the ecosystem. So if I had to pick a favorite, I'm probably going to go with the tigers. But I love the hammerheads, the deep sea six-gill sharks. Who doesn't love a cookie cutter shark? It's a cool world of animals out there. So
Absolutely.
it's hard to pick a favorite.
That's understandable. Next, we have our third graders who would like to know how hard it is to catch a shark and how many sharks do you think you have seen?
Oh gosh. Well, how hard it is to catch a shark depends on where you are. I've been to some places where we've had to work for days and days to catch a shark, usually because there are not many there. Where I was in French Polynesia recently, we put those little transmitters in 31 sharks in 2 days because there are so many of them. It was really easy to catch them and get them in. And I think the thing with sharks and working with animals, whether you're catching or observing, is that you really got to find the best way to work with the animals in the spot you are. And it's not always the same in every place. And I think that goes back to why we always try to spend time observing and getting to know a place before we dive in and start doing our research, because that'll kind of help us figure out how we can catch things or work with animals. Because usually what we try to do is handle the animals as little as possible. So if we can use things like video cameras that just kind of passively record what's going on, we'll do that. Or if we do catch the animals, that's why we try to take lots of samples so we can catch as few as possible and learn as much as we can from each time that we're working with an animal.
Thank you. We have fifth graders in attendance today from Palmetto Elementary who are wondering, what is the most difficult species of sharks to track and study?
Well, there's a whole lot of species we don't know almost nothing about. And so the hardest ones are going to be the ones that live in the deep ocean. So these are animals that may live 1,500, 2,000 feet below the surface of the water and way, way offshore in most places. And so you have to go out in big ships. You have to have technology that can survive crushing depths. And the fact is, we know almost nothing about most of the species in those deep sea areas. And so I think those are some of the ones I'm most intrigued by, because we also have people fishing in those deeper areas more and more. And so a lot of those animals live very long lives. So, some of these cold water and deep sea sharks can live hundreds of years, it turns out. And they take a long time to mature. So you don't have to catch a lot of them to wipe out their population. So, I think those are some of the hardest ones to study, but ones that we really need to start working on as soon as we can.
Sure, sure. Mela wonders if when some sharks stay during the winter and others leave, is it similar to birds where the younger ones leave and the older ones stay?
Yeah, for these sharks, it's about the same range of sizes in winter and summer. And so, we're still trying to figure out what's going on. And I think the thing with tiger sharks that in a lot of places, especially like Australia, there are just so many different ways that different individuals move. So when we put some of these satellite tags that can track sharks all over, we had sharks, one go all the way to South Africa. We had some go thousands of kilometers up the coast and come back, and then others kind of stay in the general area. And so, we're really still just starting to figure out or even ask the question of like, why do certain individuals behave the way they do? But what we are certainly seeing is that you can't just say, oh, here's what one tiger shark did or a couple tiger sharks, so that's what they all do. And so I think that's one of the really great things about science is there are plenty of awesome questions left to answer. And so hopefully, some of you on this call, maybe you'll be the ones to answer these questions that we just don't know the answer to yet.
Sure. Emily would like to know if blood sample is used for stable isotope analysis or for something else.
Somebody's been doing their reading. That's a great question. So most of what we use the blood for is stable isotopes. So the way this works, it's kind of you are what you eat. So you can look at the ratios of different molecules in the blood to get a sense of when and where the sharks have been eating. And what we actually can do is spin the blood down into the blood plasma and the red blood cells. And the plasma kind of tells us on average what the sharks have been eating over the last couple weeks. And the red blood cells tell us what they've been eating over the last few months. Now, in some situations, we can use blood for other things, and you can use it for other kind of molecular markers. We also collect those fin clips that we use for genetics. And then one of the really neat techniques we've started to use that's kind of another technology is we can actually take a swab to get a sample of shark poop. And that tells us what they've been eating because we can run that through and get the DNA of the things that they've been eating that way. And so we use lots of different techniques to try to figure out what they're eating and where they're eating. And those blood samples are part of that.
Very interesting. Thank you. Julia would like to know what your thoughts are on using eDNA for shark research.
Okay, great question. So eDNA is the idea that we're always kind of sloughing off DNA wherever we go. So, the sharks, as they're swimming, DNA is coming off in their skin. So if you scoop up some water, you get what we call environmental DNA or eDNA, which is the mix of DNA in the water. And this is a fairly new technology. So you take the water, you run it through a genetic sampler, and it tells you what species are there. And it can be really useful for saying, was this species in the area? The trick with eDNA is we still don't know very well how, when we see a shark was there, how many were there, how often it was there, because you can get a lot of DNA in the water because one individual is spending a lot of time there or something got eaten there versus, or a lot of individuals that just go through quickly. So it's a really kind of quick technique to maybe look for rare species to see if they might be in the area. But usually we have to use lots of techniques at once to try to figure things out. So we might use a combination of eDNA, baited cameras, and fishing to figure out what sharks are there and how many. And for the work that I do in trying to understand how important sharks are, one thing that eDNA can't do is tell us how big the sharks are. And so if you think about those tiger sharks in Australia, a little 3.5, 4 foot, even a 6, 7 foot long tiger shark is not something that a dugong or a turtle or a dolphin is worried about. You got to be 9, 10, 11, 12 feet long to be really important in that system. And so eDNA wouldn't be super helpful for that. And that's where we have to do the catches or cameras with special setups so we can measure size of animals. So it's really why we have to ask good questions. We kind of figure out what question we want to answer, and then we use the techniques that are best for that particular question.
Excellent. We are just a few more moments for questions here, so we're going to begin to wrap up with just a few more questions. Our next one is from Sabira, who asks, at what point did you realize you were passionate about researching and conserving shark species?
Well, let's see. I think my mom would say she knew I was going to be a marine biologist when I was 18 months old and I caught a fish in my diaper. But I've always been just fascinated by oceans, even though I grew up in the cornfields of Ohio, because I watched explorers on TV, and that got me super excited, especially excited about dolphins. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to do the TV work that we do with National Geographic and Disney Plus to kind of share our stories and hopefully inspire people. But I really got into sharks later in life when I was doing my first research on dolphins, and I realized these dolphins in Shark Bay weren't going where the fish were. And then I noticed that they had lots of bites on them. So I was like, God, I guess I better learn about sharks. So I started studying the tiger sharks. And then once I started studying the tiger sharks, I was kind of hooked. And the combination of the fact that we didn't know hardly anything about sharks, especially tiger sharks, when I started, that challenge combined with how important it was for the dolphin kind of got me on the shark path. But we still study lots of different critters in our group. The sharks, the whales and dolphins, sea turtles, sea cows, alligators. Um, I guess I just like studying neat things, and you never know what's going to be next.
Sure, I love that. Absolutely. Several members of the audience are asking about your advice for those hoping to pursue shark research just like you do, particularly those for college students or early career professionals.
The most important thing, get involved, volunteer. I mean, that's how I got into this. I was a field assistant. Whenever you get the opportunity to get involved, just do it, because there's no substitute for experience. And I think for the younger students out there, it's just go explore outside. I grew up in Ohio, turning over rocks, going fishing in ponds. There's an exciting backyard no matter where you are. When you start looking and observing nature around you, even in cities, there are like really cool birds and things all over. So, you know, just explore and find out what opportunities there are to get involved, especially for our college students. There are probably graduate students, faculty doing work, lots of opportunities. In my lab, we probably have 100 college students a year helping us with videos or going out in the field with our graduate students. And then that'll open up more doors. But, just never say no to an opportunity.
Excellent. And our final one is actually a request from Palmetto Elementary, and they're hoping you'd be willing to share with us a funny story about you and sharks.
Okay, well, here is one funny story of me and the sharks. I've never been bitten by a shark. The closest I came was I had a very small little nurse shark, which are vacuums. They kind of like to suck their prey in. And while film cameras were rolling, I had a little baby nurse shark that I caught in a giant net, and it kind of swam in the net and bumped into me, and it sucked my dive skin in. And I had my dive skin in a very funny place sucked inside a nurse shark that I had to hold on to away from me for about 30 minutes while everybody laughed at me, and it would not let go.
Oh my
So I
God.
spent about an hour with a baby nurse shark attached to me.
Wow.
Very embarrassing. And there may be video. Luckily, it was not in the social media age. So, I've survived relatively unscathed, but
Well, made a good story.
it's, yes.
Well, we want to thank everyone for joining us today, and a special thank you to Dr. Heithaus for taking the time to share his exciting career with us as he embarks on shark research initiatives. If you would like to learn more about the types of work that he's doing, as well as other shark researchers, you may visit our website as well as our YouTube channel for this video and investigate some K-12 extension resources relating to today's topic. Again, they're going to be made available along with today's recording on the UF Earth Systems YouTube channel. For more information on scientists in every Florida school and ANGARI Foundation, you could visit our web pages and follow us on social media. Today's Ocean Expert Exchange webinar was only the first in our exciting fall series. We have 2 engaging events left in 2024. On November 7th, we will be speaking with Dr. Dean Grubbs of Coastal and Marine Lab at Florida State University Dr. Grubbs will share his research on small-toothed sawfish and including the designation of critical habitats for the species in both the United States and the Bahamas, in addition to management mechanisms for decreasing sawfish bycatch in commercial fisheries. Then on December 5th, we will be joined by Michelle Hoffman-Trotter, who will talk about ocean exploration and the variety of career opportunities that exist for working at sea. Again, we want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we really look forward to seeing you at our future Ocean Expert Exchange. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.